There were 2 years of famine, and then the famine went down. Then there were 5 more years. So there were 14 years of the plenty and then the famine. And how long of, not just the 5 years, but in total, how long was Jacob and his sons in Egypt before Jacob died? You remember that? We talked about that a couple of classes ago. Put them together. 17 years. So Joseph has been in Egypt for a very long time, hasn't he? And through the course of events that we just talked about, Joseph has been elevated to the position of second in command of the entire land. He is only second to Pharaoh. And I emphasize the length of time that he's been down there because, the reason he was put in that position was because of Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh had this dream, and Joseph interpreted the dream by the power of God, and then he gave him a plan. This is God's plan for how we're going to survive this and get through it. And it was because of that Pharaoh elevated him to second in command. But we recognize that Joseph, if you looked at his resume at that point, as a kid, he was a shepherd and didn't get along with his brothers. And then he was a servant in Potiphar's house. And then he's been in prison for a good while too, right? So the resume up to that point is not really that stellar. So he's been put in that place because of Pharaoh. But everybody else on the land this is just a Hebrew stranger that came into the land, and he was a servant and then a prisoner, and then Pharaoh made him in charge. It's going to take some time for people to start to learn a little bit about Joseph other than the Pharaoh and those closest to him, right? So that's why I want to emphasize that time, because he's been there long enough that this whole land now has understood the influence of Joseph. They know something about God because of the way that God has prospered Joseph and this family. As Jacob and his other sons came down into Egypt, he stopped there at Beersheba and he offered the sacrifice. And that's when God said, go, don't be afraid to go down into Egypt because I'm going to prosper you there and I will bring your descendants back. And so all this time they've been down there and that prospering has happened. They have been in Goshen, and this 70 people has become a large family by this point, even already. In fact, all of that's going to come up to some extent as we go through Genesis chapter 50. But as we were here this last Wednesday night, in Genesis chapter 49, what you'll remember is Jacob is now dying. And in chapter 48, last Sunday, he had brought in Joseph and his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he had provided a blessing to them. And remember, he crossed his hands because what was coming in the future with these tribes was not going to be the oldest that was the greatest. It would be the youngest, right? And so after that, in Genesis 49 on Wednesday night, we talked about the other sons coming in. And Jacob offered the blessings to them. And we saw how, at least for the ones that we know more about their life, we saw how the things that he said connected to the men. But then we also saw, because we're looking backwards, we know what's going to happen with Israel and these descendants that become tribes. And we saw how that also prophesied about what would end up happening with the tribes too, didn't we? Okay. And the reason that's significant is because the ones who are receiving this book from the hand of Moses, from the hand of God through Moses, are these descendants. And they've now gone all the way through the Egyptian captivity, and they're out here in the wilderness receiving the law from God, and they're receiving their history, but at the same time, they're receiving these prophecies about what's coming. You realize, those of you who have gone through this study before, this chronological study of the entire Bible, and especially as we deal with the Old Testament, do you see, are you starting to put together the pieces of how many times God told them what was coming? And how many times he warned them about what was coming, not only in what was going to happen to them, but what their choices would be and their directions would be and their failures would be. And ultimately what he's trying to do is get them through all of that to bring about the Messiah, right? Okay, so let's start Genesis chapter 50 now. Jacob has died, and this is going to start with Joseph's response and what happened. And by the way, does anybody remember when Jacob died, do you remember him insisting that Joseph make a promise to him? Yeah, bury me in Canaan. Okay, Genesis chapter 50. Then Joseph fell on his father's face, and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for him, for such are the days required for those who are embalmed. and the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. Let's stop there. Do you think that what we just read is the normal course of action for anybody who died in Egypt? It was not. It was not normal. What happened here is because of this 17 years that Jacob has been in the land and all of this time that Joseph has followed the direction of God and prospered Egypt as a consequence of that, Jacob is held in very high esteem, even as an outsider, by the Egyptians. And yet, when he and his brothers showed up in Egypt, what was it that they told Pharaoh about themselves that caused them to be put into the land of Goshen, or given the land of Goshen? We're shepherds. Why was it important to say that? Because the Egyptians despised shepherds. And so they put them in the land of Goshen, where they haven't intermingled as much as would have happened had they been spread somewhere else out into Egypt. So in all of this time, they have kind of been separated, and they are shepherds that Egyptians look down upon, and yet when Jacob dies, he's way up here in their mind. That's got to be connected to God. That's got to be connected to Joseph's integrity. On top of that, this is a process, this embalming that the physicians of Joseph, in his position, he had, high servants. And so this embalming that occurs that Joseph tells the physicians to do is a 40-day process. They don't do that for the average guy down the street. That's only for somebody important. But there's one other little clue here that I find incredibly significant. And that is, not only was there a 40-day embalming process, but there was a 70-day mourning process. Now, the reason that's significant to me is because here's what I know. Egyptian records reveal to us that the mourning phase for a pharaoh was 72 days. So this stranger from another land whose son is in a position of authority has been mourned only 2 days, national mourning, only 2 days less than a pharaoh. Has God prospered them? Yeah. Yeah, and I emphasize national. You know how it is when something major happens in our country and there's some kind of a declaration where they fly the flags at half-staff? And it'll be for, depending on what the event was, it might be for a day, it might be for a week, it might be for a month, who knows? It's just whatever's declared the appropriate, solemn time to be thinking about this. Well, this was almost as long as what they would do if they had lost the life of a pharaoh. That's significant, you see? So the whole land is mourning because of this. Verse 4, yes. Right. Yeah. Well, the initial was because he interpreted the dream by God. Because of the famine and everything, everybody else would have been elevated.
But that was his purpose.
Right. Right.
But I think because of his integrity and because of God, he still is probably the second.
He is. Oh, he definitely is. Yeah. Yep. To the end of his life, he's there. And that maintaining of that position is because of his continued integrity, which, by the way, would have been easy to lose when you get that position, wouldn't it? To have that kind of power and that kind of prosperity, and yeah, he could have had anything he wanted. All right, verse 4. And when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, now before we read what he says, I want to emphasize two things very quickly there. This didn't happen right after his death. This happened after the 70 days of national mourning. So it hasn't been appropriate to go talk to Pharaoh about any kind of plans before that point. He has 70 days before he can do anything about that. His body's going to kind of lie in state for this 70-day period while the nation mourns. The second thing is, just to make sure that we don't elevate Joseph to a position where he is not, he didn't go to Pharaoh himself. He went to Pharaoh's family. And it's Pharaoh's family that goes to Pharaoh and talks to him about Jacob and Joseph's request. So I don't want you, when we get to the place where we're talking about Esther and Esther is the queen. Her husband is the king. And when the Jews are in trouble, it's Mordecai that comes to her and says, you got to go talk to your husband, the king. And she says, does anybody remember what she said? I can't do it. You can't just go in and, even his wife couldn't just go in and talk to him. She says, unless he holds out the scepter or requests her. And he says, I haven't been in there in 30 days. So you can't, it doesn't matter your position. When you're the Pharaoh, nobody else is equal to you, right? So even as Joseph is second in command of Egypt, he still doesn't have the authority to just go talk to Pharaoh. So he talks to Pharaoh's family so that when they're around him, they'll talk to him. And here's what he says. My father made me swear, saying, behold, I am dying. In my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now, therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, and I will come back. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father as he made you swear. So a couple of interesting things there. It doesn't really make sense to me on a common basis to think that this could be a problem. You know, why is it a problem for Joseph, potentially a problem for Joseph to go and bury his dad? Okay. Is second in command in Egypt a position or a job? It's both. It is a position of honor, but does it carry responsibilities that are significant? I mean, for 14 years, he took care of the food, didn't he? For the whole land. Yeah, it's a significant position. So what he's saying here is he has to get the authority from Pharaoh to go bury his father because he's not going to be able to fulfill his responsibilities. Okay, well, here's the second thing. He's not asking for 2 days off to fly off somewhere to bury his dad, is he? No, he's talking about traveling. And the journey from Egypt to Canaan is not going to be a day or two or even a week. It's going to take some time, right? He can't do that. That's exactly right. And so Joseph has to request. And what he says is, and here's something else that I thought of this week as I was preparing for this. There's another potential twist here. Notice that what Joseph said is, let me go bury my father and I will come back. Joseph's been down here a long time, hasn't he? He's a pretty wealthy guy at this point, isn't he? He hasn't seen his home a long time. What if he just took his dad and buried his dad and said, you know what? I got enough. I think I'll just stay here. Is that going to be a problem for Egypt? Yeah, it's going to be a problem for Egypt. And so in the request to bury his father, he's making a commitment also that says, I'll go take care of this, but listen to me. I will come back. Why does Pharaoh believe that? Because all these years, Joseph has kept his integrity. When he said something, he did it, didn't he? He kept all of that food safe from the 7 years of plenty when he could have taken bribes. And the 7 years of famine, he could have taken bribes. What if he had them? What if in the 7 years of famine, Joseph would have been somebody that didn't have integrity and took the bribes from people to give them more? They're not going to have enough, are they? And somebody else is going to die because of it, aren't they? But this integrity has been seen so long that when Joseph says, I'm going to go back where I came from, and you remember, way back when he was in prison and that butler he told the butler, you're going to be restored in 3 days. What did he say? Remember me when you stand before Pharaoh because I don't belong here. I was taken from my home and brought here wrongfully. Pharaoh knows where Joseph's from. He knows where he believes is home. And yet he still lets him go because Joseph said, I'll come back. And Pharaoh believed him, didn't he? But there's more. It will be eventually, yeah. Not this one, but the next one will be, yeah. All right. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the house of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house. Only their little ones, their flocks, and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. So not only does Pharaoh trust Joseph because of his integrity, but look how much Joseph matters to Pharaoh. There's been a 40-day embalming period. There's been 70 days of national mourning, second only to the mourning that would be there for a pharaoh. And now he makes this an official Egyptian funeral where he sends his own personal representatives from his house to honor this person that's going off. You remember the conversation that Pharaoh and Joseph had when they first met? No? When I say it, you're going to say, oh, yeah. What happened was, eventually, after they got settled in Goshen, Joseph took his father to see Pharaoh, and the text tells us that Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and that Pharaoh asked him how old he was, and he said that his days have been few and evil. Didn't measure up to the days of his father. That first conversation was about how terrible Jacob's life had been, how much he had struggled, how much he had lost. And by the time you get to 17 years later, this guy is so elevated and so honored by Pharaoh that he makes a national Egyptian funeral and sends his own family members to be a part of it. I think that when you start at Beersheba, right before he gets to Egypt, and hear God say, I will prosper you, I'll take care of you, and I'll bring you back, and then 17 years later we have this funeral procession that is what it is, you realize that God really does what he says he'll do, don't you? Did he really prosper Joseph? How did he get from the place where they're about to die to now he's like this? It's amazing, isn't it? Why is he recording it? There's two reasons. First one is because those Israelites that are out there being told by God, I'll get you to this land safely and I'll give it to you. They need to know that God fulfills his promises. And when I listen to what his promises are today, even the promise where Jesus says, and if I go, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also, I can count on that. The account confirms to me that I can count on that. So in the meantime, I keep my integrity, right? Keep reading. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great gathering. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan. And they mourned there with a great and very solemn lamentation. He observed 7 days of mourning for his father. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning of the Egyptians. And therefore its name was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. So on their journey, they don't just go straight up to Canaan. They go kind of east, southeast, and they come up on the other side of the Jordan River, out here in the wilderness, really, on the other side of the Jordan River, and they stop. And we don't really know where this is, this Atad, whatever, threshing floor of Atad. We don't know. They must have known something about it, or they would see it when they traveled through, or else God wouldn't have given them that name. But we do know that it's east of the Jordan, because he just told us that. So before they even get to this place where they're going to bury him, they stop. And they have a 7-day period of mourning. And it's not, it bothers me a lot in the religious world today when we make fads or formalities out of something that is supposed to be from the heart. Like, for example, did Jesus on the night of his betrayal wash feet? Was that real? Or was that some kind of formality? It was real, wasn't it? It was about teaching them humility and servanthood, wasn't it? And that's what they were supposed to get from that. And today we have events where we do it as a formality. I'm not saying we, I'm saying the broader religious world. Or did fasting occur in the Old and the New Testament? Yeah, in the Old Testament it was commanded, wasn't it? In the New Testament it wasn't commanded, but God talked about why it would happen from the example of what it was commanded about in the Old Testament. And it would happen because of things like this, mourning. It would be mourning, or it would be something significant that had to take your attention, and so something else would be less significant and be forgotten, right? Like your connection with God. So here, this is not a formality. They haven't traveled to this place and said, hey, let's stop here and you guys all got to be sad for 7 days. No, what we're reading about is on this journey, before they even get where they're going, they're so overwhelmed that the whole camp stops and they spend 1 week in a location mourning. This is after the 70-day period. And lest you think it's something that's fake or manufactured, the Canaanites who are around them observe what is happening out here and actually name the place. It means morning of Egypt. It actually carries with it two meanings. It can mean meadow of Egypt, but it's a meadow of mourning is kind of the way the wording is. Meadow of mourning for Egypt. They know this in an official Egyptian funeral procession, and whoever has died, they don't have a connection to him, but it's significant enough that they've just watched them mourn for him 7 more days, and it impacted the whole region. Keep reading. So his sons did for him just as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite as property for a burial place. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who went up with him to bury his father. So Machpelah, we remember that. We remember Abraham purchased this land as a burial place, and now there's several family members buried there, right? And so Jacob's going back, and one of his wives, Leah, is buried here, and so that's where he's going to be buried. So Joseph does. Would you expect Joseph to do what he said he would do? Yes. So Joseph goes back, just like he told his dad he would. He buried his dad right where he told his dad he would bury him, already prepared for him, and he went back to Egypt just like he told Pharaoh he would do. You think that Joseph wanted to be in Canaan? I do. Because the promise, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, even Joseph knows about the promise. This is where we're supposed to be. I think he wanted to be in Canaan. But his integrity took him back to Egypt because that's what he told Pharaoh he would do. That's over and over and over again. I hope that I've emphasized this enough that you're getting sick of it. The reason God could use Joseph to save this family, to save all these people during this famine even, and ultimately to protect the seed line to bring about the Messiah is because of his integrity. It didn't matter if it was something that was difficult for Joseph. His integrity before God caused him to do the right thing anyway. And so God could honor him. God could use him. That's what shines a light on God. Not on Joseph, on God, doesn't it? Because look what God did with him against all the odds. But now he's back. Let's see what happens. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. And so they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now, please forgive the trespasses of the servants of the God of your father. Stop there just a second. We just read about Pharaoh trusting Joseph so much that when Joseph says, I'll go away and I'll come back, that he lets him go and sends his own family with Joseph. So Joseph's got to even take care of his own family. And we've seen an awful lot that Pharaoh has trusted in Joseph and the Egyptians trusted in Joseph during all those difficult years, right? And yet, do his brothers have the same kind of trust in him? Why not?
They know what they're like.
That's exactly the point. Here's what we often do. We people, humans, here's what we often do. We project on somebody else what we feel ourselves. So like, you know, the person who is going to trust your word the least is probably a dishonest person. If you have integrity and you tell somebody something and they still don't believe you, that's their problem that they're projecting on you, not your problem. And we all have the temptation to do things like this. How many times, don't raise your hand, don't admit to it, but you and I have talked about it. Some of you and I, several of you and I have talked about it over time. How many times have we found ourselves in a bad situation or a struggle in life or something like that? And it's a real struggle even to come to services because when we come, we think, well, that person's looking at me strange because this happened. Or some of those people are talking about me and everybody knows what's going on. And I looked across the auditorium and I know they were thinking that about me. And every time you've come and talked to me about this, I've said two things. One is, who cares? Don't project on them what you are struggling with. And the second one is, if they are, God will take care of that. I don't have to worry about that. But that's what his brothers are doing here. Has Joseph shown any inclination to get even with his brothers? Has he had the ability to do so? From the very beginning, he threw them in jail, didn't he? Of course he had the ability to do something about this, but he never did it. And the brothers now are thinking, well, maybe he didn't do it because Dad was here. Was Dad there the first 2 times they visited Egypt? Dad was not there. In fact, even Benjamin wasn't there the first time. He could have handled it the first time without even hurting Benjamin. Yeah. So they say, our dad wanted to make sure that you knew we don't hurt us, right? Did you have a comment? Yeah. He could have done something about that, couldn't he? Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because if she's still alive, if he's second in command, even Potiphar and his wife's under his authority, right? Yeah. Okay, well, let's finish that verse now and keep going. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Why would he weep? Yeah. This tells me that this hadn't even entered Joseph's mind. He had told his brothers that he was going to take care of them, that he was going to protect them, right? When the word went back to get his dad and come down, he had told them, I'll take care of you. I'll provide for you. God will prosper you here. And now 17 years later, his brothers are still, he wept the first time he heard them talking about it. Because he's not carrying that with him. They are. He's not. He doesn't want them to be like that. So he weeps too. Keep going. I've got to finish this in time. And then his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we are your servants. And Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? What is he saying there? Yeah. Doesn't God say, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord? Yeah. And I know what we do. Oh, I know what we do, because I feel it too sometimes. Somebody wrongs you, and what you do is you want to get even, right? And you can justify it. They're wrong. They're sinning even sometimes. They're sinning. And so obviously I want to get even. And the problem with that is, well, when I start trying to get even, then I have the temptation, because I don't really want to get even. I want to get ahead. And if I do get ahead, and then you got to justify, you don't want to get even, do you? You want to get ahead too, right? And where does that end? Not only that, I don't even know how to do it the right way. But somebody does, don't they? And unless we think that it's so unjustified that we have a right to do so, I would question whether or not whatever happens to you in your life, that somebody does wrong to you, whether they gossip about you, or they lie about you, or they sin against you, and so they deserve your wrath, and they deserve you to get even. I would ask whether any of that compares to what they did to God's Son. And yet Jesus on the cross saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm saying it's integrity. Joseph, the reason he is not going to get even with his brothers has nothing to do with whether or not he thinks they wronged him. It has nothing to do with their attitude, what he thinks about their attitude. It has everything to do with the fact that he's going to trust God, and God's going to handle whatever he needs to handle. I got a question for you. What if, when they showed up that first time in Egypt, Joseph would have been the person that says, I'm going to get even, and he would have had his brothers put to death? What would happen? There would have been no tribes of Israel, no descendants, no tribe of Judah through whom the Messiah would come. You see what happens with integrity? I'm just going to leave it with God and let him handle it. But as for you, you meant evil against me. You see that? He knows they did it on purpose, right? He knows they're guilty. You meant evil for it, but God meant it for good in order to bring it about as it is this day to save many people alive. I wonder when he formed that view. I don't think he had that view when the brothers pulled him out of that pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites. I don't think he was sitting there thinking, well, they're hurting me, but at least God meant this to be a good thing. He's going to use it for good. I don't think he did that while he was weeping. And that's what we read about he did, right? I don't think he came up with that while he was in the Potiphar's house. I don't think he came up with it when he was in the prison. I think he came up with it somewhere around the end of the 7 years of plenty, when the 7 years of famine started and his brothers showed up. Because anybody else that's in charge of all of that food, any Egyptian that's in charge of all that food, and these shepherds from Canaan show up, they're probably not going to be treated very well. And they might leave empty-handed. But because Joseph's there, they're taken care of, aren't they? So he said, I think he had to come up with it then. That's when he looked back and said, yeah, I've told you many times, I strongly believe in God's providence, but I don't believe that you can see it while it's happening. I believe you can see it looking backwards. Because I hear people all the time say, oh, look at what God's doing in my life, and it turns out that was a terrible thing. I don't think God did that. It's when you look back that you can say what God did and what God did not do, and how God used it. This situation, as bad as it was, God was able to use, and Joseph eventually learned that. So 22, Joseph dwelt in Egypt, and he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. So he has great-great-grandchildren from Ephraim, right? And the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up on his knees. So he has great-grandchildren through his other sons. Has God continued to prosper them? And Joseph said to his brethren, I'm dying. This is the best verse. I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. That's the best passage, because here's what it says. The reason Joseph was a man of integrity is because God is a God of integrity. And Joseph, the reason he could take his dad and bury him and still go back to Egypt is because he knew that God had promised he would visit them one day and take them home. And the people that are reading the end of this book are carrying Joseph's bones with them as they're going out into this wilderness. They are close to 400 years after the account of Joseph begins. Around 400 years after the account of Joseph begins, and they're the recipients of what Joseph just said at the end of his life. God will visit us and take the descendants out, and here we stand. Does God fulfill his promises? Does he still fulfill his promises? Can our faith grow to the place to where we can really live that belief? I'm going to say something in the sermon this morning about what John believed. And in my notes, I've written it this way. If I keep true to my notes, this is what I'll say. You'll hear it again in just a minute. John believed what he believed so much about what God's promises were that he went to his death holding on to them. But that's not actually the right word. He didn't believe it like people believe things today. He knew it. That's faith. He knew it. It wasn't a leap in the dark. He knew it. Joseph died knowing that one day God was going to take his descendants out. And he said, when that happens, take me out and bury me in the same land where we're going, where God's going to bless us. That's the kind of faith we've got to grow to. Okay, let's close with a prayer. Father, we're thankful this morning that we can be in your presence, studying your word, and we're thankful for the period of worship into which we're about to enter, and we're thankful, Father, that you have preserved these accounts to strengthen our faith, to build our trust, to help us to depend upon you and to shine your light. Help us always, Father, to walk with you. Forgive us where we fail you. In Christ's name, amen.